gorgeous faces, right? You didn't think I could keep topping it with the guests, right? Look who I've got for you. You asked for him for like 2 years. When are you getting Edoardo on? Edoardo Ballerini, everyone. You guys know the rules. Okay, quirky questions only, please. Type in the chat. Try to put question ahead of time because there are a lot of people on this call. I don't want to miss it. And we are set to sail. I've already got some questions. And I did kind of binge The Sopranos, just a tiny bit, just because you're so cool in it. I was like, oh my God, I get to talk to that guy tomorrow. So now moving to LA when you're 18, you start to pride yourself on not getting starstruck and like you can run into anyone, you don't care who they are because you're in the business kind of thing, right? Mm-hmm. And but I think even I'm tempted to get a little starstruck. So 10-year-old Edoardo, tell me about him. What were you doing? Edoardo. 10 years old. What were you thinking? What were you dreaming?
Okay.
Who were you?
All right. This is interesting. So 10 years old, I was living in New York City. And believe it or not, I was in a theater company at the time. It was a Commedia dell'arte troupe, if people know what that is.
When you were 10 years old?
I was. It's called the Giullari di Piazza.
How did you do that?
All right. So my father taught at NYU, and he was very connected to like anything cultural Italian that was happening in New York City. So there was this crazy group of artists, musicians, actors, and they had this company called the Giullari di Piazza.
And I'm starstruck now.
I ended up... I was almost like their mascot more than anything else, right? I was the only kid in the company. And so at 10 years old, I was doing shows with them. And I even at one point did an off-Broadway play at Theater for the New City when I was about 10 or 11. And so I started off in acting and performing. And then it was quickly stopped because, believe it or not, it started to like kind of take off a little bit. And I remember I had to go somehow. Like an NBC talent scout like found me or something and wanted me to go up, and my mom brought me up to the NBC offices.
Wait. Okay, I'm missing a bit of this story. We got to go back further. Were you before this all started? Were you at some point, Mommy, Daddy, I really want to be an actor? Or did somebody just think, oh, it'd be a nice idea. Eduardo's got quite a mouth on him. Let's put him in theater. Like, how did it start?
I absolutely did not want to be an actor. I was more of a sort of quiet, literary kind of guy. I read a lot. I wrote things. I wrote some, 10-year-old poems. I tried to write a movie for the Marx Brothers. I was going to write them their next movie. I didn't realize that the Marx Brothers were no longer around, but I'd seen their movies and I was like, I'm going to write them a movie. I remember
I keep interrupting you, but it's so good. This is sparking so much stuff. Do you remember that magic of childhood when like the world is yours?
Yeah,
like,
I do.
Why can't I write them a movie? Why can't I just
No, I very much remember that. And I think I was very quiet. I was, I wasn't that loudmouth kid who you'd think, oh, this guy wants to be on stage. He wants to be in front of a camera. But I somehow ended up with this theater company, which somehow led to this play, which somehow led to this like screen test. And then my mother was like, absolutely not. I do not want to have a child actor in the house. And so I got pulled out of all that, and which was fine with me. It wasn't like I was like, damn it, no, this is my life's passion. This is what I have to do. And so then, unfortunately, my parents got divorced and everything got very dark. So that joy,
how old were you?
It started, I guess I was around 12.
Okay, that's hard.
And I'm an only child. And you're just like about to hit puberty and like all that stuff. It was a miserable time. So all that spark that you're talking about, that like, why can't I, like anything's possible, kind of drained away, unfortunately. And so the next phase was not so happy, but I don't know how far down we want to go into that.
So how many years was the struggle phase, would you say?
I'll let you know when it's over. We'll go on the next talk. No, that's one of those things that really you carry for life.
Do you not think it makes you a better actor?
It probably makes me have a different, hopefully richer view of the world. But it was a tough time, I think, for a lot of kids. It was a
Yeah.
tough thing when their parents got divorced. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, experience is what we draw on as actors. And so the more experience in different kind of ways, hopefully if you can use it, the better.
Because it connects, doesn't it?
Yeah, it
Every
connects.
crack
And
connects.
yeah, and unfortunately, pain is a great teacher,
Yeah.
we wish it was just, oh, you get more from pleasure than pain, but often we learn more from painful things than pleasurable ones.
And
Either what to continue or what not to continue.
as narrators, I can't remember one of the guests. I can't remember. Maybe it was a quote, probably Einstein for all I knew. But they said that as narrators, our job is we receive other people's pain and we hold it in a safe place and we interpret it and spend it and throw it back out at them. So the more we've dealt with, the more we've gone through, we're a safe place, right? So like that. So at this point, are you just going to school, lost, not knowing what you're doing?
Yeah. Wow, we're really going here. Okay. Yeah, I ended up going to a boarding school just to get out of the house.
Wow.
And it was a very conservative boarding school, which was not really for me. So after that, I went to Wesleyan University in Connecticut, which is a very liberal arts place, which was very much for me. And I'm doing this very quickly, and then I was very much interested in literature. And the heavy hitters. I was into James Joyce and Henry James and Gertrude Stein and all these people, and I was sure that I was going to be an academic like my parents. Both my parents are professors, and then I one day in Rome, Italy, actually, was studying Latin of all things, and was bored out of my mind and going a little bit crazy. And I answered an ad saying American actors needed. And I joined this weird expat theater company in Rome, and then quickly came back to New York, and the acting bug grabbed me, and then it just kind of took off.
I love that. My father was in Cleopatra and all those,
Wow.
He was an extra. He was one
Wow.
of
Yeah.
the,
Those famous scenes. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
he was around
amazing.
all those times. We used to go to dinner parties. Like all I remember is a childhood full of balconies with lots of very glamorous directors and producers smoking cigarettes, being
Wow.
cool. I still
Wow.
think I'm going to look like Sophia Loren someday. My chance, still, I have to have a chance.
Right. Yeah.
But yes,
Somehow.
how did you do the Italy? When did you start going to Italy? Why? What was the
Well,
Italy?
my father's Italian. I spent all my summers in Milan, going back and forth, because as I said, my parents are academics, so they had the summer off. So we would go to Milan for 3 months a year, and I did that until about the age of 16, basically. And then after that, I was a teenager, and then college, and then I was on my own. But I still try to get to Italy every year, at least
Where's
for
your
a few.
mother from?
My mother's American,
Yeah, so
but
yeah, so same Italian father, American. Who did the
right,
cooking in the house?
my mother.
I'll see. My father did the cooking. You missed
Yeah.
a trick there, Edoardo.
Okay. Yeah, my father can't boil water or make a piece of toast. So, he's that side of the ledger.
So do you still go back a lot? Do you still
I
go
try to
back?
go back once a year.
Yeah.
Now I have kids who are ages 10 and 7, and I really want to bring them to Italy and make that a part of their life. And
Yeah.
I always say one of my goals for when we go to Italy is to be there and not be tourists. I just want to be there. It's fine with me if we spend 3 days just walking around and going to the supermarket and, going to the bookstore and picking up a book. Like, we don't have to jam ourselves into museums. We don't have to jam ourselves into tours. Like, let's just be here. And I feel like that's a very valuable thing, just to absorb a culture, just to kind of live in it. It's like, if we have to go buy a pair of sneakers, that's what we're going to do this afternoon. We're just going to live here. And it's a short period, it's only a few weeks, but I try to get that to be a part of our time there. I want them to feel like, oh,
Home.
you can live somewhere else, you can be somewhere else. It's not just like in America we go to school, and then in Italy we're tourists and eat pizza and
You're
gelato all
giving
day.
them a great gift. I live in the UK for that reason, because that's how I
Yeah.
grew up.
Yeah.
You assume you're going to move somewhere exciting. You
Right.
just
Right.
assume you are when you're older.
Yeah.
Whatever way you have to.
I hope they get this, that like there are other places in the world you can be, you know, you
Yeah.
don't have to just be here. And I know Americans, right, you know, it's not the fault of their own. We're this enormous country. There's plenty of places to travel within America.
Mhm.
And we're not that close to anything except Canada and Mexico. It's not like in Europe when you're like, oh, I'm in Italy, I'm going to go to France, you know, oh, I'm in England, I'm going to go to Ireland. You know, we are this kind of isolated, massive thing. And so you understand why Americans are just like, well, just stay in America. But I'm trying to make sure they understand there's a whole big world out there.
Where's your heart? Like, where do you consider your home in your heart?
That's a really interesting question, because for many, many years, I thought New York City was really my home, and that's where I grew up. That's where I was a kid. That's where I lived until, you know, I was in college, and then I came back to New York and lived there as a young man. But now I feel a disconnect with New York. I feel like the city has changed so much. And now when I go to Milan, believe it or not, I feel like this is where my heart is, you know, and I
Yeah.
think it's a nostalgia for my youth,
Yeah.
you know, and just that there's something about the streets and the stones and the entrances and just the little details, you know. It's not about the big monuments, it's just about every little detail. And it's so familiar to me. I take great comfort in it. So I don't know. I honestly, this may sound really, you know, trite, but I feel like wherever my family
Yeah.
is where my home is. You know, it's
But
like wherever we are, that's home.
you know what you said about New York changing? That's a thought, because when you were in Milan, when you were little, we're a different person when we're little, right? And I think when you get older, I'm not going to say I'm that age yet, but you get to a certain age where you start like missing the person you used to be, or like thinking about them. Maybe you can be happy with your life, but you're like,
Right.
and you were a different person when you were a kid there. So when you get to go back, you get to
Yeah.
be more
Of
that
course.
person.
Of course. And sometimes when I go back into the city, right now I live just outside the city.
Yeah.
Um, I sort of remember my, you know, 25-year-old self, and I kind
Yeah.
of look around hoping that the city still looks like that, and it doesn't, you know. And so
Would you
there's
ever
a
go back? Would you ever
to
move
the
to
city.
Milan? Would you ever
Oh,
move to Milan?
I would love to spend some time there, a longer
Yeah.
stretch of time. Um, you know, right now it's difficult with relatively small children just to like grab somebody and say we're moving.
Yeah.
But you know, it's certainly always in the back of my mind. But with New York, you know, you walk around and New York is such an ever evolving city.
Yeah.
You know, some of these old, you know, European cities tend to be a little more stable, right? They build their big buildings on the periphery, but not necessarily dab smack in the middle. American cities are different. They're willing to just like knock everything down and build everything
Take
up
it
as
over.
right. See, we were in Paris recently, and I hadn't been in Paris in 30 years almost, and it was like the exact same city, because they don't build new buildings, right? It's like, yeah, the street signs maybe have changed and the cars are different and the fashion is different, but the buildings themselves are exactly the same. But
You're
New York
back.
City is different. You walk down the street and you're like, oh, this used to be a theater and now it's a high rise. And, you know, oh, this used to be a bookstore and now it's the Starbucks. And, you know,
I kind
and
of
so,
like both. We lived in the Channel Islands for a little while, and it was a massive culture shock. I think I was like one of the first Americans that,
yeah,
so it was like a culture shock. And we moved away and we moved back years
yeah.
later. And I walked into a pub, and I swear to you, the same guy was sitting there with the same pint. He was like, no time had passed.
Right.
And
There's something comforting and terrifying at the same
yeah,
time, right?
wouldn't want to live there forever. So literature, how
Yeah.
did you find your way into being this like exquisite actor?
Well, thank you for the compliment. So my transition into acting, the real spark of interest for me was Eugene O'Neill. And because I came from a literary background where I was studying Joyce and Eliot and all these, you know, modernists, um, I found O'Neill to be this perfect bridge because he was so literary. You
Right.
know, you can read an O'Neill play the way you read a novel.
Yep.
I mean, he even has incredibly long descriptions of things. Like he's down to describing the veins in Mary's hands kind of thing, you know, and you're like, this is a play, like people are going to be seating 100 rows back, they're not going to see the veins in her hands, but he put in those details. And so he was this very literary writer. And so I read his plays and I found them fascinating. And then I joined this little group of people at the Actors Studio who were doing this thing called the Eugene O'Neill Project. And so we worked on O'Neill, and he was my sort of bridge into acting. And then not all acting is at the level of Eugene O'Neill, of course. And so you know, as all actors do, you start jumping into whatever you can, whether it's a guest spot on a TV show or a small part of a movie.
The jobbing actor.
You start, you have to work, you have to get experience, you know, you can't just
did you have like a love and a determination for it at this point? Because it's not an easy gig to start pounding the pavements. I mean, were you then, this is what I want to do? Or
yeah, I found, you know, what I found fascinating about film and television was the power of storytelling that had the ability to reach such a massive audience. And so when I thought about like O'Neill, and I would be in New London, Connecticut, doing some early O'Neill for 30 people in an audience, there was a part of me that was like, wait a minute. I could be on TV or in a movie that is going to be playing in 3,000 screens across the country or in everybody's living room. Your chances of storytelling and your audience reach is much, much greater if you do that.
Right.
And so it's obvious, and so I never really pursued much theater. I've done very little theater in my life. And so I got intrigued by the storytelling power of film and television. But then, as I say, you know, life and careers being what they are, you start to like grab onto this because there's a paycheck attached to it, and grab onto this because there's a paycheck attached to it.
How did you feel? Were you confident in yourself? Were you, I can take this or leave this? Were you, I'm gonna get this? How did it feel when you got that call about The Sopranos? What did you tell yourself?
That was later. I'd already been acting for about 10 years at that point.
Yeah, see, they make it look like it's like you jump in and next week you're on The Sopranos. It's not, is it?
No, no, I'd done a bunch of films and other TV things before that, although that was certainly a whole different level of, you know, that show, because I joined that show in season 6, so it was already this juggernaut of a show, right? I remember getting the call saying, you've got this part. And I think I ended up in maybe 5 episodes. But at the time, it was just for one episode. It was like a couple of scenes in one episode. And I was such a huge fan of the show that I was like, oh my God, like I'm going to be in this thing that I watch every Sunday, you know? And it was like the only show that I watched. So it kind of blew my mind. And then when I showed up on set, it was really surreal because all these faces that I'd seen on the screen were suddenly in your living room around.
The childhood barrier of the world being yours and the limits we learn, that's gone. You're in the world.
And I will say about The Sopranos, which was interesting, and I've never experienced this on any other film or TV show, is that because it was so famous, they literally had crowd control to get the actors from the trailers to the set. Wow. And there would be like police barriers holding people back, which blew my mind. And all I could think, I was like, this is like being backstage at a Rolling Stones concert or something. Like, you know what I mean? Like the police are here holding the fans back. And I remember talking to the security guard on like my first or second day there. And I was like, this is nuts, you know? Because it was just me and Michael Imperioli, like walking along. We had to go like half a block or something. And the guard turns to me and says, you should see it when Jim's here, you know? And I was like, oh, wow, whole new level. So that aspect of it alone was just an incredible cultural phenomenon to see and to sort of be on the other side of the rope for a few minutes. Be like, wow, look at all these people.
But then I'm assuming it changed your life as well, because some of that had to bleed out into you walking down the street and being recognized more.
There was, I mean, look, I have a relatively small part in the show, all things
Everyone knew Corky.
I tell you, it's really strange. And, you know, I'm very proud of this because, as I said, my screen time in The Sopranos is very limited, right? It's not that long. And yet, everybody remembers this character.
Yes. Everyone knows Corky.
something about this character like connected to people, and he was weird enough and different enough that people were like, who is this guy? So yeah, I mean, there's a fair amount. It still happens every now and then. Somebody will say, hey, you know, Sopranos or whatever. Well, I'm just in Grand Central Station or something. And it always makes me think, like, what is it like for Michael Imperioli and those
But
guys? You
have you always been like very, I mean, did you ever, I hate the word imposter syndrome. I think it's so gross and such a catch-all for us all these days. I have imposter syndrome. It's called life. None of us feel perfect at all times. But did you ever feel like, you know, that Talking Heads song, This Is Not My Beautiful Wife,
Yeah,
this
sure.
is not,
Right.
did you ever feel like, am I here? Is this me? Is this going to keep going? Am I up to it?
I always wonder if it's going to keep going. You know, I
Yeah.
always wonder that.
Yeah.
I didn't do any acting on screen for 7 years, and I just recently did a series, which was the first time back, and I wasn't sure I was ever going to act in front of a camera again.
Is it the Clive Owen?
Yeah, the retreat. So a part of me made that choice. I wanted to do narration. I wanted to be around for my kids. Narration, as you well know, you kind of are much more control of your schedule than filming.
I bet your kids get some killer story time, bedtime stories, huh? Do you read them?
I try, but believe it or not, they'd rather their mom read to them. When it comes to reading, I'm persona non grata in this household. And my daughter loves these Judy Moody audiobooks that Amy Rubinate narrates. So we're big fans of hers in this household. But to your question about the imposter syndrome, you know, I always found that there was this disconnect between what a public thinks is going on with somebody and what the person themselves experiences.
Yeah.
And because I never arose to, you know, DiCaprio style fame, I never had this kind of like crazy life where I was just in such a bubble. I was always living a very real life. I was still taking out the trash. I was still, you know, trying to pay my bills. I was, you know, living that. And I remember this one time I got off a plane. I was in Newark, and I was standing on the curb, and I'm really just waiting for the light to change so that I can cross over to get the bus, right? Nothing fancy.
Yeah.
And this guy comes up to me and he goes, "Hey man, I love your work in movies." I was like, "Oh, thanks." And then he says, "Are you waiting for a limo?" I was like, "No, I'm crossing the street to get the bus." Like, you know, so their perception of it is like, you must live this lifestyle and in this world and on this plane. But I know that that's not the case, you know.
And some people try to sell that. I had a friend that when I lived in LA, my roommate was from Wales. So she kind of had to be a nanny because not being from America. And she was one of 4 nannies for this woman because she had 2 toddlers. And her life, I remember thinking, well, she didn't have a life. She had a business.
Yeah.
Like her whole life was a business. She had to get dressed for 3 hours to go out to lunch because in case someone saw her, or, you know, the grocery store was like 4 nannies, and it was a business.
Yeah.
And I don't think you'd want that.
That sounds crappy.
Yeah.
But anyway, so no, I've never really felt that, you know, for the combination of reasons that I've never had to live that kind of lifestyle, thank goodness.
But as a narrator, you know that narrators, we think you're like superstardom. You're up there with like Deepak Chopra and all that.
Oh, well, thank you. You know, and the narration stuff, I kind of, it happened somewhat accidentally. I was out in LA. Somebody asked me to narrate a book. I said, sure, I have a literary background. And I'd actually been studying meditation and Buddhism at the time. And so I was thinking, and I'm able to sit still for hours at a time. It's like, this is the perfect combination of things. And so I'm not kidding though. I was like, I knew this was coming. I was like,
that's the best reason to do meditation that I've ever heard of.
Right. I was really like, I have the 3 elements you need. Like, I love literature, I'm an actor, and I can meditate. So it's like, that puts you in a booth to read a book. And I enjoyed it. And then I didn't really think much of it. I came back to New York, and then I did a couple of things. Like, this was around like 2009, 2010, when things were starting to really open up in this industry. And a lot of us who were actors who really hadn't given audiobooks a second thought
Yeah.
before, well, suddenly there was demand and work, and some people gravitated towards it and some didn't. I did. And so I did a handful of books, and then somebody over at Harper asked me to do this book, Beautiful Ruins, by Jess Walter, which I did, not knowing anything about Jess and really not knowing anything about what I was doing. And it turned out to be this massive hit. And it
Yeah.
was this very early instance in the audiobook industry where the audiobook was outselling the print, which was kind of unheard of.
Yeah.
And so it really caught. And so then the cloth version came out, and the book started selling. But at the beginning, it was crazy that the audio was outselling the hardcover. And so, and it's had this great success, and all of a sudden I was like, oh, there's an awards show? I had no idea. I was really naive, right? Then I started meeting all these people, and I had to say the narrator and audiobook world is full of so many wonderful people. And I felt very welcomed, and I felt very at home. You speak of home, and I felt like this is a group of people that I would love to spend more time with.
Okay, this is a great place to segue in, not to
Yeah,
interrupt you, but I have
please.
a question from, I think he's actually here. Jim wanted to know. I had two questions, and this one's
Yeah.
the perfect one. Social media.
Hmm.
The reason I reached out to you, I try to do social media. It annoys me sometimes, then I love it sometimes. Normally, I'm just like hanging out with my friends, not really promoting.
Right.
But your tweets are just divine. They're so lovely. You're like a human being with an interesting family life story kind of thing. And you like, oh, his daughter, yours and Hope Newhouse has got a little
Right.
French daughter. And you're just like, what's
Right.
she doing now? It's,
Right.
and Jim was wondering how you was it easy for you to become adept at social media? How do you find the relationship between being friendly, promoting, being present online, bringing yourself
Yeah.
to it, how do you do social media so well?
Oh, well, thank you for the question. I actually feel like I don't do it very well, but I appreciate that somebody has a different view. Perspective is really important. So believe it or not, I sat down a few months ago with a guy who, I don't know what, he's like a social media coach, basically.
Really?
He was a friend of a friend, and he sort of helps people manage things, because I was like, I know that a lot of people know who I am, and I do these books that sell very well, and a lot of people are listening to me, but I don't really connect with people in social media. And he kind of showed me a few tricks of the trade, and he showed me about balancing, work stuff and personal stuff, and sort of not posting too much, and, you know, uh, grabbing other people's posts and using them. And so he gave me a few tools to use, and I was very
Yeah.
grateful for it. So, Jim, thank you. I appreciate it. Although, again, I don't really feel like I'm very good at it sometimes. But I'm very pleased to know that somebody thinks I am.
But that's a good point, Jim, and anyone else out here. Check out the call we had with Jonathan Tilley, because he does that. He does.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought of that, the social media coach, but that's kind of what it is.
Yeah, I mean, and look, if you don't want to, spend time with a person, there are plenty of articles about it where you can read, but they do offer some basic guidelines about, what to post, when to post, how to post, and there, tricks for being more successful on it.
Okay, question from Jim.
Yeah.
The other question he had was accents. See, I didn't forget you, Jim. I've got this all up here. Accents.
Yeah.
How do you approach them? How many have you approached? What's your feeling about which ones to accept, and how far will you go? Main protagonist, an accent you've never done. Do you study? Do you go into the booth and remember all the, this wasn't his question, but now I'm embellishing. Sure. Do you remember all the rules when you're in the booth? What do you do with accents, Edoardo? Is it easy for you because you were born?
I mean, I was just talking to Julia Whalen, who I think you have talked to.
She was on last week. Yeah.
Yeah. We were talking about, industry stuff, and accents came up. And I actually find accents to be fairly easy. Maybe it's because I grew up bilingual. I grew up in a household. My father is really a linguist, so we had like, it's kind of a joke, but like at the dinner table, we would have people discussing language, when I was a kid. And so they would talk about, different languages and different ways to say things. And so it's just sort of been in my blood. And being bilingual, I think that helps. Obviously, the accents I feel most comfortable with are Italian and Latinate languages. But I feel very comfortable with Russian and German too, for whatever reason. But here's the thing about accents, which I found really interesting, is that I do feel like now in the industry, people are pulling their foot off the pedal when it comes to accents. And I think probably to not risk offending people. And I think that's legit. There are some accents I do better than others. And I would imagine there are some I feel like I'm pretty weak at this accent, but here's the character in the book and I'm doing accents for everybody else. So here comes my best Swedish, like I'm going to study as much as I can, and it's probably not great, but, and so I do feel like there's this industry-wide thing where people are pulling back on this. And I do think, and you've probably noticed also that like suddenly the industry is much more interested in dual voicing books,
Yeah.
like if it's half a man, half a woman, or
I always
assigning.
get the guys that make the woman, they make the woman sound like this. I'm like, you do know that my voice is deeper than yours now,
Right,
don't you?
right,
It's
right.
like
But I
women
mean,
don't
the point,
all go up at the end of our sentences. We don't
right,
all sound stupid. I'm
right.
not
Well,
saying all narrators do that. I'm
you
just
know,
saying
I
it's
get you.
sometimes a go-to tendency.
But I think there's this real effort to sort of do casting more specifically and more deliberately, and whenever possible to break things up and even give a couple of chapters to somebody.
Yeah,
If the perspective is from a black man's point of view, all of a sudden
yeah.
it's like they don't want me to narrate it, and I'm fine with that. And so the rules of the road have changed a bit, and so accents, I feel like I'm doing fewer of them. In fact, here's an
Okay.
interesting one. I'm doing this book next week, and the author reached out to me, and so I said, let's get on a call because I'd love to talk to you about the book. Um, he's Cuban. The book is set in Germany, and then it moves to Cuba, and there's all kinds of accents, right?
Cool.
And well, my first question to him was, I was like, how do you feel about accents? Like, do you want these characters to have accents? And he said, no, he would prefer that they didn't. And he said the book is in translation. It's for an English speaking audience. And I said, fine, I'm glad I asked because I probably would have jumped in and started doing accents.
Yeah.
But I thought it was interesting. He was like, let's not do that. Whereas in the past, I think people would have been very much like, yes, do German accents, do Cuban accents, do whatever you can.
And then do
Um,
you pull it back to, I had a writer ask me because they had listened to different narrators and they asked my opinion. They said that they noticed that some narrators very much play the different character voices, and then some narrators play just the attitude
right,
and don't differentiate the
right.
voices as much. I know every narrator has a
Yeah,
personal style. How do you, I mean,
right.
I did, my favorite character ever was in an apocalypse, and it was a dog. But the dog was so well written and I
Right,
felt that dog.
right.
It's you know what I mean? So I love the attitude question, but I do different. How do you fall into that? What
I
do you feel about it?
my kind of approach is to do what I call I cast the roles in my head. And
Right.
so I kind of take them. I don't worry so much about the incidental characters, but I take them, I prep the book, I go through it, I understand who the key characters are. And then what I do in order to keep it clear in my head is I'll kind of cast it. And by casting, I mean like I could assign an actor to the role, or I
Yeah.
could assign you,
Someone
to
you
be like,
know.
yeah, like I
Yeah.
could just, so every time I come back to this character, I'm going to think of you. And I'm not necessarily going to do an impersonation of you, but I'll try to embody, you as best I think I can. But it gives me a point of reference. right? And so, and whatever you know, could be end up in a chapter with somebody that I have Harrison Ford in my head, you know, for. And so I'm just thinking of Harry when I do this part. And again, I'm not going to do a Harrison Ford impersonation. I'm not really an impersonator by trade, but it just helps keep me grounded. And so when I come back to them, I know who they are. It helps me visualize it.
Like the guy walking down the street in front of you and you imagine their gait, like Julia Whalen's call last week. She will
Right.
forever be my to-go reference for
Yeah.
somebody that has bulletproof self-confidence. That will be Julia Whalen, because she was like,
Okay.
I don't care what people think of me. That's it.
Yeah.
I know
No,
what I'm
she's
doing.
got,
I'm driven. And that's
right.
going to be me. I'm inhabiting that
Right.
for pretty much most of my life now, from now on. Sorry,
Right.
Julia. But you know what I mean? That's why
Sure.
these calls, we learn from
Yeah.
knowing each other.
But I find that what I call this casting process has helped me immensely,
Yeah.
because it really is. So when I come back to a character, I don't have to think, what voice was I doing for them? You know, I just think, oh, that was, you know, Richard Burton, whatever, you know.
Yeah.
And so because he was an older, you know, Brit, and I was like, I'm just going to throw Richard
And
Burton.
you're not focusing just on the voice then. That's the
No,
entire
it's all
embodiment.
of him, right? And so I try to throw that into it. I also tend to, I kind of gesticulate when I narrate. I kind of like conduct.
Italian.
I know, I know. So I'm often like punching my own microphone, so I got to redo that. Where I make too much noise and things are rustling.
Your editors must
Uh,
love you.
yeah, well, I try, you know, but no, I find that sort of conducting the language helps, right? So even as I come across a sentence, it can be a very simple sentence, but if I can find a way to just work my way through it, you know, I can do something more with it somehow.
Are you visual? Because I had a music teacher teaching me singing, and she said that I never thought I was visual. She said you're a visual person. So when you want your voice to, because I keep falling to my
Yeah.
low register if I get tired, she said when you want your voice to go higher, move your finger out and follow it. Are
Mhm.
you a visual person, do you think? Do you think
I
that
don't.
helps you?
I don't think so. I think I'm actually more of an auditory person. I think
Yeah.
I try to find the musicality in language, but I don't come by it visually. No. Um, as I said, my you know my parents being academics and very literary, and my father being a poet, and having grown up going to these poetry readings with discussions of language, and so
I
I
love
think
your
I approach it.
childhood.
Yeah, it was interesting. It definitely was interesting. Um, and it was in a very gritty New York City back then. So there were a lot of interesting memories from that time. But no, I come to it that way, and I try to find the musicality in language, you know, even in places where you might not expect it. Like, let's say you're doing some like hard-boiled thriller, right? And you think, well, this doesn't need to be lyrical necessarily, but I kind of disagree. I think it really should be. I think it should have a musicality, because I think we have to remember that this is a listening art form. And so you are, in a sense, in the same realm as music, right? And so people are going to be listening to you. And I think you need a musicality to it.
And
So,
thrillers, you've got me in my heart, because I was thinking I'm doing one with a completely insane killer. But
right.
the thing is, there is beauty in the way a mind that's that disturbed works, don't
Yeah,
you think? And there
sure.
is, you're right. I never thought of that. There is like a musicality, because that kind of mindset would come out in the way they
Right.
talk, wouldn't it? And
Yeah.
oh, I love that. Oh, you've just made me love thrillers 100 times more than I already. Okay, I've got another question.
Yes.
So, did you has your narrating changed from when you started to now? And can you identify the changes? And were they consciously made, or were they naturally and organically occurring?
That's a fantastic question, one that I've been thinking about a lot recently, because I've been doing this for about 10, 12 years now. Yes, it has changed. At the beginning, I had no idea what I was doing. And so I went in, and I think there's actually something very positive about that, because I went into it very sort of open and raw.
Yeah.
I actually think I got some interesting performances early on because I didn't know what I was doing. It's like when you see a young actor on screen and you're like, my God, they're just so raw, right? And then you check them out 10, 20 years later and they're like a little polished,
Because the
right?
critical mind steps in and starts checking themselves
Well,
when they,
you know, you can only be new to something once, right? After
yeah,
that, you know.
yeah,
And so, yes, I think my style has changed. I like to think I'm better than I was. I my the actual quality of my voice has changed. You know, I'm 10 to 12 years older, so it's gotten a little deeper. I noticed that the other day. It's funny. I was reading something and I was like, "Oh, you sound older." I was like,
but
when did that
do you
happen?"
think on another hand though, you've trained it?
Yeah, well, you also use something, you know, as
Yeah,
much as we do, and you know, you get a lot of miles on a voice, and so, uh, but no, I think I'm more deliberate than I
mm,
was earlier on. I certainly think I've put in my 10,000 hours, so I'm, you know, much more skilled.
yeah,
You know, I do feel like I'm sort of uh, I really know what I'm doing, right? I can really see a page and kind of know how I want to do the whole thing now. And I can
yeah,
kind of really anticipate where things are going. Um, I also benefit from doing a lot of good books. I'm not going to lie. I've been very fortunate to do some extraordinary writers. And I do think a lot of our job is to follow the writers. And so when you have a great text in front of you, sometimes the best thing you can do is not get in the way. And
yeah.
so I feel like you know, I'm reading Amor Towles, you know, and it's so gorgeous, the writing. I feel like sometimes my job is just to make sure that the words are in the right order and not, you know, stumble on them and not put too much layering on top of them.
But
So I
you've
do
made me
benefit.
think again. The books you're reading, the books at the level that you're at now are so beautifully written. They have to be going into making you a different person because we're reading and we're absorbing the books as well,
Yeah,
right? And we bring the person we are to our narrating.
yeah,
So of all the books you've done all
yeah.
these years, think about the person you are now.
I no, I absolutely feel like these books have informed me and I've grown tremendously. And I feel like I actually see the world very differently because I
Yeah,
have all this great literature in my head. One downside to this is that, you know, when you work a lot, and I know it's always lousy to complain about working a lot,
yeah,
but sometimes it just passes through you and you don't quite spend the time with it or let it really seep into you because you're already on to the next thing. And that's happened to me a couple of times recently where I read these beautiful books, and then after I was done with them, a week later, I couldn't remember a damn thing about them. You know, I really
yeah.
couldn't have even told you the main character's name. Like I was just like, well, I finished that book. I sent it off. You know, I'm waiting for corrections. I'm not thinking about it anymore.
And you didn't
So
experience it or enjoy it as much as you could
yeah,
have.
and so that is actually a downside to this industry. And because I do have this, you know, deep and abiding love of literature, it concerns me a bit because
Yeah.
I'm kind of churning through things. So I'm trying to actually slow down a bit on the number of things I do and mix in more of the film and TV so that there's more of a balance going back and forth and I can actually pay more attention to the books I am doing.
Have you read 4,000 Weeks?
No.
Or you got to read it. Seriously, everything you're saying, it's like the things you said that you're recently thinking of, you got to read it. It's life
Okay.
changing. It's an
Okay.
astounding book. Like,
All right.
I don't know anyone that hasn't been completely. Okay, so I've got a question from Kim.
Yeah.
She wants to know, is there one character or type of character that you've performed that left a mark and has stuck with you?
Absolutely. Um, and I don't know if we're talking film and TV or literature, but I will say I'm going to go to narration and say that I had the amazing experience of narrating this Norwegian writer, Karlova Knausgård, who wrote a 6-volume epic called My Struggle, and it's 3,600 pages long. And it took 5 years to record the whole thing because they were coming out, they were being translated as we were going. So, you know, you do one and then you'd wait a year, you'd do one and then
Wow.
you'd wait 8 months. But they're written first person. And so to me, and this writer, Karlova, and there's so much overlap in our lives and thinking we come from very different places. He's Norwegian, I'm American and Italian. He had a different upbringing. He wasn't an academics child. I am, like all that. And yet there was this intersection of our lives. And so this first person book, 3,600 pages, I felt like was a monologue that I was delivering, and it was 133 hours long. And I could not get this man and these books out of my head while we were doing this.
Wow.
I was just living Karlova. I mean, I started dreaming about him. I started thinking that he was like in the house somehow, or, you know, sitting outside smoking his cigarettes. And, you know, I would have like almost these imagined interactions and conversations with him.
It made me think about the partner of a narrator.
Right,
It's got to
right.
be like
Oh
the most
God, yeah. No,
patient
unfortunately,
human on earth.
this was all at night, so, you know, everybody was asleep. No, so that role, and I do consider it a role, you know, really affected me. And, you know, it's amazing because he talked about being a young man and his artistic ambitions. And then he goes all the way through having kids and having some commercial success and all this. And I just felt like I'm living what you're saying, you know, like
Wow.
I get it. And it really touched me. So that stayed with me. The other one, the film one that has stayed with me is I did a film many years ago called Dinner Rush, which was a very small, but now it's got this kind of cult following.
You
Where
were
I
the
played a
chef. Was that? Yeah,
Yeah,
you were the chef. Yeah.
with Danny Aiello as my father, and a wonderful cast. And because it has this kind of cult following, which is very strange, even though it's 20 years old, this film, it's still, people ask me about it and write me about it. And so it's become such a part of my life. And I went on publicity tours for it, and I had a wonderful time doing that. So it was a big part of my life back then, and it still continues to be. So that part and that experience and that role has kind of stayed with me.
You seem to have, I mean, you might be like the most messed up person on earth that stays up and chain smoking 80 million cigarettes a night, but you seem to have a gentle joy toward life. And I get that from the tweets about your daughter as well.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking from your kid's point of view, growing up with a dad that just gently approaches life and tries to feel joy. I think that's a lot. I think that's the measure of a man at the end of the day.
I'm laughing because the joke in our household is that I always have a sour look on my face. And I always try to say,
have them watch this video.
Okay, good. I guess that's what's called the resting bitch face. I guess that's the term for it, right? Where it's just your default expression. Most people's default expression is a bit of a frown, I guess. You know, not many people have a natural just smile. And so the default is that I always look like I'm upset about something. I'm like, no, I'm actually fine. You know. So I'll have them watch this.
Yeah, have them watch this, because I think it's a great. Okay, I have another question from the audience, guys, and then I have one last question I'm dying to ask you, and then we've got the final question. I promised you we would wrap up on time.
Okay.
Rebecca says, I call it resting bus face. No expression needed while riding the bus. Well, see, I was lucky. When I was young, someone told me that if I frowned, I would get jowls. So now I smile even at the most inappropriate of times, and I've done that my whole life.
Wow. That's
so
funny.
Yeah, I'd rather have the lines here. I'm no jowls. I
Right. I guess if you smile, you get the smile lines up.
Yeah, exactly. But they say that your face shows the life you've lived. So I'd rather have a face that, you know.
What's that quote? By the age of 40, you have the face you deserve.
You deserve, or something? Which really pisses me off.
Right. Like, I deserve that.
Exactly. Al, I want a fresh start. Alan says, do you have a dream narration project that's on your bucket list?
Well, you know, because I come from a literature background, there's so many classics that I would love to do. Unfortunately, in our business, people don't really want to redo the classics because there are 20 versions of them already, and you know, they're public domain, and every publishing house already has them. And so I've always wanted to do Moby Dick.
You should do it yourself, public domain.
It's public domain, I know, and I've thought about it. It's not a small undertaking, though, you know. It's
but you can put it in, like, do small amounts.
No, I know. A long time. And I've actually done some public domain titles by myself, and you know, I always encourage narrators to do this. It's like, if you have a book that you love and it's in the public domain, do it. You know,
And
it's like, why
also,
not?
if Edoardo Ballerini has Moby Dick on Audible, I would buy it.
Well,
I
thank
think
you. But
everyone
you know,
else would.
I don't know. There are probably 30 versions of it out there, so
But
it's
I
hard
did
to.
Frankenstein and
Okay,
it's still selling and I still get paid for it. And I'm a
great.
girl. Who wants to hear a
Right,
girl? There's like one of the most famous, I can't remember, I'm really bad with one of the most
right.
famous actors of all times did it. I would buy his book over mine.
All
But
right.
somehow, it's
Anyway, I would love to do Moby Dick, and maybe I'll just do it for myself someday.
do Moby Dick and
All
let
right.
us know and we'll buy it.
Okay.
Okay, I've got two questions.
Yeah.
One I've wanted to hit you with. So, what are your faults? Do you have any faults? Do you have any like, oh, I procrastinate or oh, I don't like to exercise? And how have you overcome it or how do you plan to overcome it?
I do have faults because I'm a human being, of course. I think my biggest fault is that I am great at starting things, but not so great at completing them.
Mm.
So, you know, if I'll just take what we were just talking about. We could say like, oh, I should go do Moby Dick. Absolutely. I'll start getting it all ready, and I'll get the PDF, and I'll read it and prep it, and then I won't actually record it. And that
Yeah.
happens to me a lot. And so I have these various projects that I've had them my whole life. And some I have completed. I'm not, you know, completely stuck in that rut, but I do feel like I'm great at starting things. I get off with all this energy, and then I just hit a wall. And that ability to keep going, I think, is what separates a lot of people. So, what am I doing to overcome this? I will tell you what I'm doing to overcome this. I have started working with other people, and I find that that helps me
You're
commit
accountable.
and yeah, and complete.
Yeah.
So, you know, I've wanted to create material. So Jess Walter and I created an original, The Angel of Rome, which we co-created and I recorded. And so now I'm talking to other authors about creating material together. Um, and I find that it holds me accountable.
Yeah.
It relieves some of the pressure. And that has been my workaround, although there are still projects I'd like to do on my own. Um, but you know, maybe I'll ask a producer to come on the Moby Dick project and say, look, if you can help get this done, we'll figure out some sort of sharing thing. And you know,
Yeah.
so
If you
maybe
want a
that's what
book cover done, I'll do the book cover for you. I do great book covers.
oh,
I
great.
can
All
see
right.
it now.
Okay.
Mariana, I'm one last question, then I'll give you the
Yeah.
final. But I want to say, Mariana says, "I'm your fan since I saw you in 24. What is your best memory of that role?"
So 24 was interesting, and thank you, Mariana. I had this 24 when I got on. I was on season 1, and it wasn't a big hit yet. And so I came in the middle of the season, and it's an interesting experience. I'll try to tell this quickly because they thought they were going to get canceled. They had a 24 episode order, but they thought they were going to get canceled at episode 12 because
Oh,
the ratings just were not there. And this was in the cutthroat era of like, just throw shows out, don't give them a chance, right? And then Kiefer Sutherland won the Golden Globe, I think, or the Emmy or something for Jack Bauer. And so they're like, oh, well, we got an award-winning actor now. Let's keep going. Let's at least finish the season. And then I jumped in at episode like 17, 18, I think. Um, and I remember there was this crazy energy on the set. You know, I mentioned The Sopranos having like the police tape and holding people back. The energy on the set of 24, season 1 show that had just survived by the skin of its teeth, it felt like, was so high, and it was so cool to be a part of. And I remembered thinking like it was just electric on that set. And I
wow.
remembered like I played this it was an interesting character. But to keep myself sort of amped, I was like running around the sound stage between
Were you a
takes.
killer or a good? I've never seen.
Yeah. No, I was playing a bad guy.
Really? Was it fun? Is it more fun playing a bad guy than a good guy?
I absolutely think it is.
Yeah.
I think it's more fun to play people who are very far from your reality. And I also
Yeah.
think that playing the bad guy is always nice because then people leave you alone. I remember reading an article with Gary Oldman, one of my favorite actors, and he said nobody bothers him because they think he's so weird, right? You just
Yeah.
walk down the street and, you know, but if you're some TV friendly person, people are all over you and make your life
Yeah.
hell. Anyway, no, I remember like running around the set and like jumping up and down and like going into and just like going for it. And it was like this great energy on that set. I had a wonderful time on it. Then a funny thing happened. I know we're running out of time, but this will tell you how Hollywood works. So I did my episodes, and at the end of one episode, there's a plot point which suggests that you're going to see this character in the next episode. In between this episode and the next episode, they hired Dennis Hopper to finish out the last 4 episodes, I think it was. So he was like the big villain at the end. And so what they had to do is kind of clear the decks for Dennis Hopper, right? Because they needed to find scene room for him. So they kind of had to shed some characters.
Oh.
I was one of them.
Oh.
And so the premise of 24, as you know, is like it's a clock, right? That's continuous, right? So the episode ends at 5 p.m. The next episode starts at 5:01 p.m., right? It's continuous. So the episode ends with me and 3 other people walking out of a room, and we're getting arrested. The next episode, the next time you see us, only 3 people are walking into the police station, and I was just left at home.
Oh, whoops.
I was like, so to this day, I've always said I got Dennis Hoppered out of that show. But otherwise, I'm pretty sure they were going to continue that character on.
That's like that. You always hear about the guy that gets the bit part in the show, and then he has all his friends over for the party on opening night, and
they get cut. Right. Yeah. Right.
Okay. We've got just enough time for the final question. For the audience that's going to be watching this in 60, 70 years, what would you like them to take? What would, if they remember nothing else about this call, words of advice, a funny joke, something you'd like to leave people with that you'd like them to remember? And it doesn't matter if it sounds corny or cliche, but what would you really like people to know?
I had an interesting experience recently with my daughter. I'm going to come back to my daughter because I know she has a very high Q rating, evidently.
Yeah, she's the star of the show.
She's the star. I was teaching her how to ride a bike. She's 7 years old, and we were out on the street, and she was really struggling. She would go like 2 pedals and just stick her foot out, 2 pedals and stick her foot out. And I knew she could ride a bike. It was clear that she was able to do it, but the only thing that she didn't have was the belief that she could ride the bike. Oh. She didn't trust it, right? And so I went up to her and I said, trust yourself. And she got on the bike. She was going, trust yourself, trust yourself, trust yourself.
Oh.
And then she got on the bike and she went down the block. And it was like the greatest moment. To add to that even more, the other day we're over at the school in the lot riding around her bike. She's great on it now, right? And we stopped for a second to have a sip of water. And she said, you know, 2 words are why I can ride a bike. And I said, oh, what are those? She said, trust yourself. So I
can't wait to see what she becomes when she grows up. Can't you?
So if I can leave anything to this world, it would be to tell people to trust themselves, because I think people have enormous capacities and enormous abilities. Yeah. And more often than not, what holds them back is that they don't believe they do. So that's what I would like to leave.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's a lot. Leaving us with that, that's everything. That's wonderful. Thank you, Edoardo. This was pure joy. I'm so glad.
Such a pleasure.
It was wonderful. Thank you. And see, I got them for you guys. You can stop sending messages. 2 years worth of messages. Oh. Can you not get it, Edoardo? Can't you just send him a message? I'm sure if you find someone that knows him, he'll come on the show.
This is my great pleasure. Thank you.
Happy that you came, and video will be out in 2 weeks, guys. Thank you very much. Mwah! You're all wonderful. Bye, Edoardo.